We normally, at this time, share a story for all ages, but today I wanted to tell a story of all ages. Instead of hearing a 3-minute story, think of this as homily part 1. It will be a few minutes more than 3 minutes, so don't be alarmed, and then we'll swing into joys and concerns. All too often, during a celebration of life, I talk about the ancestors of the deceased. Our ancestors are important. We get our first principles from our ancestors. We are each part of their legacy. Therefore, today, while I am alive, here is a brief story of my ancestors. First slide.
Yeah, sorry, on your script it was a little bit later. It wasn't ready yet.
Sorry about that. On my script it was on the earth. Yes, here we are. I'm not waiting until then, my celebration of life. Here are my ancestors. First slide, please. William Scales, my great-great-grandfather, came from Lincolnshire to Canada and served as a Wesleyan Methodist minister in Quebec's eastern townships and in Ontario. His wife and my great-great-grandmother was Sarah Neeshaw. One of William and Sarah's 6 children was Robert Neeshaw, who we always referred to as R.K. Scales. Born in Ontario, he moved to Virden, Manitoba in about 1896 with his wife, Annie Wilcox. They are my great-grandparents. R.K. and Annie had a son, Harold Wilcox Scales. In 1906, the Scales family left Virden, Manitoba, and moved to the new village of Salmon Arm. R.K. Scales bought a dry goods store and was elected the first mayor of Salmon Arm. One of his proud duties, now, first mayor of Salmon Arm is like being dog catcher in James Bay. It's like very small. But we're proud of him. One of his proud duties was to turn the big tap on Salmon Arm's first municipal water supply. R.K. and Annie's children, Effie and Harold, were raised in Salmon Arm and lived there for many years. This much has been my ancestors on my father's side. My father's mother was equally important. In 1870, an English couple, William Foreman and Emma Jane Adams, left Whitstable, Kent, and emigrated to Muskoka Lake, Ontario. They ran a hotel and raised several children. At about the same time, an Irish couple, Robert Ennis and Elizabeth Sholdis, left Ireland and immigrated to Ontario. Those people were also my great-great-grandparents. The Foreman family had a son, Ernest Richard Foreman, who was always called Dick. Dick Foreman married the daughter of Robert Ennis and Elizabeth Sholdis, Mary Ennis, pictured here. In 1892, Dick and Mary came west to Lacombe in central Alberta. Out on the prairie, the Foreman family raised 3 daughters, including Myrtle, my grandmother. Winters were hard, so the family moved to Penticton. This much has been the ancestors on my father's mother's side. And here's how my grandparents met. Harold Scales, my grandfather, joined the Canadian Army at Salmon Arm in 1917 and was shipped to Willows Fairground in Oak Bay for a brief period of basic training before traveling to England and then to bloody Flanders. Harold had qualified as a bookkeeper before the war, so he was a medical orderly in the Canadian Army Medical Corps. He lived through the war, and despite several gruesome experiences, he seemed to have kept his wits about him. When my grandpa Harold Scales returned to Salmon Arm from the war, he took a job as a bookkeeper with a fruit company in Penticton. There, and likely at the Methodist Church, he met Myrtle Foreman. They courted and married in 1922. They had 2 sons, Bob and Jim. Jim was my father. Harold, Myrtle, and their sons moved to Salmon Arm. Harold worked in the gas station, and Myrtle was the secretary to Percy Ruth, a notary public and real estate agent. When Percy Ruth was told that he had to retire, Harold Scales bought the company and called it the Harold and Myrtle Scales Notary Public. Their sons finished high school in Salmon Arm, and whereas Harold's father, R.K., when he was mayor of Salmon Arm, had turned on the first municipal water supply, Harold, as mayor of Salmon Arm, turned on the tap for the upgraded municipal water supply 30 or 40 years later. So far, what I have told you is about my English and Irish grandparents who came to Canada and eventually to BC. But that's only half my ancestors. Stefan Billen left Western Ukraine in 1903 and homesteaded near Lorley, Saskatchewan. Once he had broken a bit of land and built a shelter, he was joined in 1906 by his wife, Justina Sherpowicz. They had at least 6 children. These are my mother's maternal ancestors. The eldest of those 6 children was Katie Billen, my baba, or grandmother. She's in the right hand of this photo. In 1928, Peter Slepets emigrated from Western Ukraine to Western Canada. He worked in the railroad town of Beausejour, Manitoba. When he got enough money together, Pete Slepets got onto a train and headed to farm country in Saskatchewan. At the village of Watson, he got off and found work in a sawmill. He worked hard until he could buy a farm. Talk about working hard. He worked all day in the sawmill, and in exchange for salary, he got to borrow the horses and work his land at night, bring the horses back in the morning, and work in the sawmill during the day. Once he had built a simple house, he traveled to Lorley, Saskatchewan, and courted Katie Billen. Pete Slepets married Katie Billen. These are my grandparents, my Baba and Diodo. Pete and Katie had 3 children, Zenon, Roman, and Sally. Sally is my mum. Now all of my direct ancestors are named and recognized. Jim Scales of Salmon Arm joined the Bank of Commerce and eventually got posted to Dawson City, Yukon, where our member Karen is today. Sally Slepets of Watson trained as a registered nurse and for her first RN job got posted to Dawson City. They married in 1961. I was born in 1963, my brother Rich was born in 1964, and our family adopted our sister in 1966. Like his father before him, my dad moved us to Salmon Arm to take care of his mother after the death of Harold. Also, like his father and grandfather, my dad served on city council. My brother and I left Salmon Arm in the early 1980s, but we still feel roots there. The principles and values that I hold come partly from those ancestors. And that is the story of all ages. Oh, back up one. I forgot about this slide. I was kind of proud of that one. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. It's totally fine. It just takes a moment. This one or the one before?
This one.
Okay.
When you think of your own principles...
Please use the mic.
Oh, yes, thank you. When you think of your own principles and think of where they came from, these are just some of the people who directly gave me my principles. These are my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents. And I think I've got one great-great-grandparent listed. We'll now swing into Pebbles of Joy and Concern. In this congregation and in congregations around North America, we take this time to share joys and concerns.